All right, looks like we have some people joining the chat. How's everyone doing? And I guess where's everyone zooming in from? I'm interested to know. So I'm in Minneapolis. I'm in the Twin Cities. And in the chat here, wow, we have someone from Australia. That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm in the state of Minnesota in the Midwest. Awesome. We have someone from Twin Cities as well. Love that. Yeah, I have some family in Adelaide actually. Some first cousins there, and I have yet to visit, but it's on the bucket list. All right, yeah, I know Agoura Hills. I'm from some actually originally from Sacramento, and my fiance she's from San Diego, so I know LA somewhat. We have someone from Sweden. Wow, awesome, awesome. Looks like someone's raising their hand here. Feel free to leave a leave a question or comment in the chat if you have questions, comments, thoughts, compliments. We haven't even started yet. But you can find links to my social media handles here in case you're so inclined to stay connected with me. And, if you have questions about pretty much anything I talk about, I'm happy to answer them after the chat as well. If you want to DM or leave a comment on one of my videos, etc., and so on. The latest video I posted on YouTube seems to be trending pretty well. It already has like 1,000 views, which is I don't even have 1,000 subscribers, so that's pretty exciting. And it's like a reaction video to Dr. Glaucomflecken, who is an absolute genius and just he's hilarious, right? Some of you all may have seen his videos. Um, so yeah, I think we're just waiting for some more people to join the chat here. Yeah, Dr. G is somewhat of a comedic, just satire genius, right? He has a way with comedy in healthcare, doesn't he? All right, so I think I'll get started. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and then talk a little bit about Picmonic and then move on to talking about COMLEX, of course. And then after that, we'll kind of wrap up with a Q&A and we'll announce the winners of the Picmonic True Learn giveaway at the end. And that'll be a wrap. So so my name is Nick. You can find my social media handles at Dr. Parisis. Parisis is my last name, of course. It's Parisis. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, where I post mostly about radiology and medical school and residency, and then also talk about COVID a little bit and other pre-med topics. So I actually used Picmonic in medical school, and I went to med school at the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine in Bradenton, Florida. So I'm originally from California. I did my undergrad at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where I did molecular and cell biology. After that, I went to LECOM for 4 years in Florida, and I'm currently a PGY2 postgraduate year 2 diagnostic radiology resident at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. And I'm happy to talk about radiology if you guys have questions about radiology, because I think it's the best specialty, the best kept secret in medicine. Unbiased opinion, of course. So I used Picmonic during my first and second year of med school. And at first I was like, oh, this is kind of a fun way to learn. I'm like, oh, this is an interesting learning mechanism. I was pretty unfamiliar with these picture mnemonics or video mnemonics at first, but I gave it a try. And after a couple months, I actually realized that I was retaining way more information than, let's say, more traditional ways of studying, like reading or lectures and that type of thing. And here we have playing one of these B, B vitamin Picmonics. And I realized that I was retaining this information when I was in like a group session, a PBL session, and that stands for problem-based learning or case-based learning. Some of you all may have that at your medical school. And it was when we were just talking about B vitamins in this particular patient case. And I realized that I was remembering a lot of information and had like accidentally like memorized without like truly like being like super serious about memorizing the B vitamins and the symptoms that go along with their deficiencies, because I was able to recall them in the PBL session pretty seamlessly, I would say. And I think a lot of my, well, not a lot, but a couple of my classmates, they commented on that. They were like, "Wow, how did you already like know this stuff, this content?" And it was because I had seen the Picmonics a couple times over the course of a couple months before, like leading up to this case. And this Picmonic kind of it kind of relies on the spatial like memory palace technique, which is like a really powerful memorization and study technique that a lot of like champion memorizers use, like people who have to like memorize like super long numbers or like sequences of seemingly irrelevant information. And so what they do is they kind of place these numbers or whatever they're trying to memorize into different palaces or like places that they know very well in their mind. And so that way they're able to kind of mentally go to these places and then retrieve that information and use it. And so you can imagine if you watch a Picmonic a few times, the story, the audio and the visual, the cartoon, the names of the characters, they all kind of come together, and so they allow you to have a similar technique where you're able to go back to the Picmonic, back to the sketch, back to the visual, and remember like, oh, this like name kind of rhymed with the symptom that I'm trying to memorize or the certain concept that it's linked to. And so it sounds kind of funny, but I would definitely encourage you all to use it if you're not. And yeah, it definitely worked for me. So it's a little bit about Picmonic if you're not familiar. And yeah, I guess we can start talking about COMLEX after that. So I took both USMLE and COMLEX. And so really studying for boards, studying for these exams start really on your first day, your first week of medical school. So your med school curriculum, doing well in your med school curriculum actually is going to pay off down the line when you sit down for these exams, or when you sit down to for dedicated studying for these exams. And I didn't really realize that until it came down to like sitting down to study for these exams. Like you don't really know what to expect until you're in it. And thankfully my med school had a really good foundational kind of basic science foundation for knowledge going forward. So I felt like I had a pretty good foundation going into board studying. So definitely kind of get a good knowledge base, a good foundation before you get to board studying, because then it'll make remembering the basic concepts easier, and then you'll be able to hang your hat on kind of the more difficult concepts to remember. And those are things like B vitamins and biochemical pathways, and just kind of rote memorization of all of these syndromic things and kind of the constellation of clinical symptoms that go with these syndromic diseases that are very difficult to remember otherwise, because you don't really have that clinical experience to hang your hat on quite yet. So my first tip is basically just take studying seriously from day one. Really, it's pretty simple tip. And then when you get to dedicated studying, I think my second tip for everyone is basically just don't like overload yourself with resources. I see this mistake being done all the time. And there's really a handful of core resources that are proven over time to work for both USMLE and for COMLEX. Um, so first of all, figure out what those are for you. For some people, they're a little different than others, but there's some core ones that everyone really should be using. Um, and then don't spread yourself out too thin. Don't try to do everything. Don't try to add irrelevant resources. And so first of all, you want to figure out what resources you're going to use and like stick to and commit to. And then the next step after that is having a schedule and sticking to the schedule, but also being flexible. Um, so, for example, my dedicated studying was in like the fourth semester of medical school or the second semester of second year of med school. And so I had kind of like a 3.5, 4 month time period where I was allocating like how many questions I'd be doing, which videos I'd be watching to make sure that I got through all of the content. So having a rough schedule is helpful. And there are tools out there like Cramfighter that can help you um, create a schedule, but I didn't find that I necessarily needed one just because I knew which resources I was going to use. But if you have like a lot of resources that you want to get through and you want to know how long it'll take you to get through them, then Cramfighter can be useful for that. So you want to be flexible with your studying because there's going to be unexpected hiccups that happen during dedicated studying. Like you're going to have to take time off or a day off here and there, or it's going to take you longer to get through certain sections. So just kind of account for that. Personally, I made sure to carve out time to do things that are important to me. Like I took like a short trip to Mexico during dedicated studying and traveled home to California for like Easter and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that you don't burn out too and that you peak at the right time with your studying. So yeah, so resources and scheduling. Pretty basic, but I think pretty important. So we have a question here. What are the core tools? So the core tools, so I guess this can be tip number 3. The core tools are, really the core tool is UWorld, USMLE World. That is going to work both for USMLE and for COMLEX. So I did use TrueLearn partially for COMLEX, but I actually primarily used UWorld. So I treated COMLEX just like I would treat UWorld with some minor tweaks. So really you want to get through UWorld once for sure. There's like 2,400 questions. So I would do like 40 question blocks on timed and on random in order to kind of simulate what the exam would look like, what the exam might be like. And you want to make sure that you have enough time. So typically for 40 questions, it would take me all day to review them afterwards because you want to like look things up in like first aid and stuff like that. So just account for how many days you might need in order to get through all the content in UWorld. So UWorld's awesome because they have awesome diagrams and their explanations are very, very good. And you'll learn a lot from the wrong answers in addition to the right answers. And just their question stems are very, very well written. But specifically for COMLEX, so a lot of the USMLE knowledge will translate directly to COMLEX. That's really no surprise, or nothing should be too out of left field. But if you have extra time, I would definitely recommend doing some TrueLearn questions. My school had a subscription to TrueLearn. I think Picmonic and TrueLearn are partners of sorts, and I did probably 800 or so of those questions because I think my med school had like practice tests through TrueLearn for COMLEX. So I made sure to do all of those practice tests just to get a gauge of like how I'd be doing. And how I was doing was just as well as how I was doing on USMLE and the practice full-length exams. So it was a pretty equivalent kind of translation. So basically just focus on UWorld as your main learning source, I think. Of course, there are some other notable mentions. So the first one I'll mention is Pathoma. So I think Pathoma is an amazing resource. I was using it throughout first and second year of med school, even before dedicated. And so once I got to dedicated, I had gone through Pathoma maybe once, and so I was already pretty familiar with most of that material. Um, Dr. Satar, he's the pathologist who has that course put together. I mean, he's just an amazing teacher. And what he teaches is extremely high yield, both in the hospital and on other questions that you'll get down the line in third year with your practice material on rotations. Um, so definitely use Pathoma. The other core topic or core resource would be Sketchy. So Sketchy has like tons and tons of different videos now going into like internal medicine and really sketches that I didn't have when I was a med student. So I use it for pharmacology and for microbiology. But similarly, like if you use Sketchy and Picmonic and these types of visual learning tools throughout first and second year, then you're gonna be in a pretty good place once you get to dedicated. So I think I watched all the Sketchies as like kind of like a more passive way to learn because it made it really easy to remember all the bugs and drugs. But I think because also the examiners know that everyone is using Sketchy, they oftentimes did not use like the buzzwords and stuff like that. So they would try to like describe um, pathophysiology and clinical presentations in a question stem or in a vignette a little bit more creatively. So a lot of the buzzwords are not going to necessarily pop up on test day necessarily, but you still need to know that information, and you still need to know the buzzword anyways, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, um, of course, you know, people talk about first aid. I think first aid is a great resource. However, I did not use it really at all until like the final weeks of my studying. So I used it basically as like a reference, or if I was like consistently getting something wrong in the question banks, I would like make sure I studied that table or that page in first aid and like put it in like Anki or something so that I could really memorize it. Um, and yeah, it's just really hard to learn from first aid because it's like bullet points. It's like shorthand notes really. So it's a really nice place to go after you've learned a concept or like know kind of what the concept is talking about. But first aid, you know, just like straight up reading first aid, I don't think that would be super helpful to anyone. And I think a lot of people say this as well. It's not just me who's saying this. um, some people like to make a book out of text aid, out of a first aid, or they like to make like a textbook or like a binder out of first aid. Um, and you can do that, but you know, I didn't really find that that would be super helpful for me necessarily. So the way I used it was like I said, I was like memorizing very specific things in the book, and then on concepts that I was weaker on, things like maybe like psychiatry or like biostats, I'd go back and like take really detailed notes in the first aid chapter that was like relevant to that topic. So I would like write down whatever's in UWorld or whatever I learned from another resource like Sketchy or Boards and Beyond or Pathoma. I would like write it in first aid because, of course, the writing process helps you process information in your mind better actually than typing does. So that's another tip for you all too. Is just like when in doubt, kind of write it out because there is a lot of literature from the psychology people talking about how writing is superior for learning and for memorizing than typing is. Um, so yeah. Um, After that, you know, I also use kind of Boards and Beyond kind of casually to supplement, like I was talking about earlier, with the topics that I was weaker on. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. You know, a lot of people watch Boards and Beyond throughout their first and second year of med school, and that's what I did as well. But I really didn't use it that much during dedicated. I would use it more as a supplement. And then another supplement I would use was Anki. So Anki is like a really powerful flashcard application, um, and it uses really two principles. It uses spaced repetition and forced recall. And so spaced repetition refers to seeing a concept over time, like spacing it out. So let's say you learn, I don't know, the anatomy of the heart like on day 0, and then on day 7 you don't remember all of it because there's like this forgetting curve that goes like this. But then if you test yourself and you find that you're remembering certain concepts in cardiac anatomy, then the forgetting curve kind of gets reset if you see that concept again, and then the slope for you to forget that information gets flatter and flatter over time as you space out like how often you're getting tested on that concept. So that's the first like principle of learning with Anki. Um, and then the other principle is forced recall. So really, that's why questions are so powerful, or that's why like teaching a concept to someone else is very powerful, or like talking about the material with your friends or with your family, like explaining things is very effective for your own learning and for your own teaching, because you're forced to mentally recall the information and to use it. So when you are presented with a flashcard, then you're forced to use that information right on the spot right there. So it's a very active way of learning, and it's not a very passive way. So oftentimes when we're tired with studying or like kind of burnt out, I think it's helpful to do more passive things like watch videos. Um, but active is the most effective. But of course, we only have so much energy and so much time in the day. So that's why I've recommended all of these resources here. So basically, UWorld, TrueLearn, Pathoma, Sketchy, plus or minus, First Aid, Boards and Beyond, and Anki if that works for you. So I hope that's helpful for everyone. And let me know if you want me to elaborate on any of those topics right there. I think the last thing I'll talk about in regards to COMLEX is like, you want to take care of yourself when you're studying too. People talk a lot about like burnout and kind of mental health and taking care of yourself online, and I think that's super important, but maybe for different reasons. Of course, mental health and that type of thing is extremely important. I'm not downplaying that at all, but if you think about it this way, if you take care of yourself, you do things like make sure you sleep enough, you keep your connections with your family and your friends and your loved ones, keep up those relationships, you make sure you eat right, you eat well, and that you're well rested, and that you have time to like actually exercise and like work out and go to the gym or go on a run or whatever form of exercise you like to partake in. Those things will actually pay off down the line when you're doing dedicated studying anyways. And so let's take sleep for an example. So when you sleep, your mind is not at sleep. It's not like it's turned off. Your mind is like processing everything that happened during the day, right? So it's super important not to skimp out on sleep and to make sure that you're well rested every day. So that way you can come back to those UWorld questions and to these flashcards and videos, and really give it your all, right? Now, when you sleep, that's also when you consolidate memories and when you do a lot of learning, actually. The mind is kind of pruning away certain neurons and strengthening connections to other neurons based on kind of what you are being exposed to, is the idea. And a lot of neuroscientists talk about the importance of sleep, not only for memory and for learning, but really for kind of general cognition. So if you want to be kind of at your peak performance, not just for boards, very importantly for boards, but also for other aspects of med school like rotations um, or anything like any other exam that you're going to have to take. So make sure you're well rested. Similarly, kind of diet, like keeping a healthy diet is extremely important. So one thing I would do was not have like a really carb heavy meal for lunch, because I found that I'd get like really sleepy in the afternoon just because like your blood sugar spikes and then it drops off really fast after that. And I just found that it was really hard to stay awake and stay focused in the afternoon. And you really need to be like on like for a good 8 hours of the day. It's really hard to sustain that. And so what I would do instead, I would make sure to have like a lot of vegetables or like a big salad and a good amount of protein for lunch, just to kind of keep me more kind of even keeled, because the fiber is a good way to kind of keep you satiated, to make sure that you're not hungry, and same thing with the protein, and it kind of prevents those really big swings in your blood glucose levels. So that was one thing that worked for me, and of course, titrate your caffeine as you like, um, and similar to how sleep helps you consolidate memories, exercise helps with this too. So exercise, I mean, it has, if there was a pill that could emulate all of the beneficial effects of exercise, I mean, that pharmaceutical company would be rich, right? So exercise has obviously like cardiovascular benefits, pulmonary benefits, so many benefits, right? But it also helps your mind work. And so if you think about it, when you're exercising, you're like sweating, your heart rate's going up, your breathing rate is being elevated, and so your heart is like working harder. It's pumping blood for like the hour that you're working out, and it's pumping blood faster, and it's pumping blood also up to your brain. So your cerebral perfusion is increasing as well. And so you can imagine that that can be a very helpful thing for the body in general. So just to kind of keep your cognition in top shape, exercising during the day will help you um, retain more information, and it'll help sleep, and it'll help regulate your mood. And there's a lot of data on like how sleep and exercise has a very beneficial effect on things like anxiety and depression. So yeah, that's my spiel for that. So um, let's see, any questions? Let's do a short Q&A from here, and let me know what's on your mind. Like, what do you all want to know about? Do you want to know about um, radiology, residency, other study techniques or tips? Yeah, so tips for step 2, level 2. So similar to how I studied for step 1, I really, or for COMLEX level 1, I really focused on studying for USMLE step 2, and then all of that translated over to COMLEX level 2. And I would say for all of the clinical, the very medical questions, they translated very well. Like everything that I learned through UWorld translated awesomely to COMLEX. But there was one part of COMLEX that was super, super tricky for level 2. That was very specific to level 2, and level 3 and level 1 didn't really have it. And that was like all of the ethics and like jurisprudence and like kind of medical legal stuff. Well, I don't even know how I could have prepared for for that. One way for you to potentially prepare for all of that would be to maybe do TrueLearn, to do the TrueLearn specific questions for those topics. But I think I remember I had done some of them, and they were just really like out of left field. Like they were such hard questions, and yeah, that was just like really tricky for me. And so it's very similar. The resource that I used for step 2 was UWorld. I had a little book called USMLE Secrets. I think it was mildly helpful. It wasn't super helpful. The videos that I used were the online med-ed videos, which a lot of third year and fourth year students rely on. I thought they were pretty good, but again, I feel like it was like moderately helpful. It's more of like a passive way to learn. It's not a very active way. And yeah, you just want to get as many questions as you can, and get all the reps in. Take as many practice exams as you can. Make sure you do all the questions. If you can, do them twice. I had done all of the USMLE World questions throughout third year, once through, and so when I sat down for dedicated for those 4 weeks, I had already done them once, and so I was going through them a second time. And then same thing for step 1 or COMLEX level 1. I had done all of the UWorld questions once, and then I think I got through them a second time, like 60%, 60% through. And I think people who sometimes struggle with USMLE, they kind of stretch themselves thin, and they don't get through all the questions. So just make sure that you're able to get through them. Really, that's the main thing. Other things for level 2, I mean, I think those are the main things. It's like those are the resources that I use. I made sure to do all of the MBMB practice exams. Um, and yeah, other questions? Anything else? All right, guys, I'm all yours. So don't be shy, I guess. Uh, sorry about that. Looks like we got disconnected. Um, but I see another question here. What study scheduler did I use? And the answer is that I didn't use one. I made my own. So you don't necessarily need one to be successful, but um, it certainly could help. So, um, oh, someone was wondering here about material for step one resources. They missed that part. So it's really USMLE World, the question bank, the True Learn question bank, if you have time for that. Um, Pathoma, super helpful. All of the NBME exams, those official exams. And on top of that, plus or minus kind of whatever is helpful to you is like Boards and Beyond, Inky, and Sketchy. So, okay, other question. How many hours a day did I dedicate? I would say like 8. So I made sure some days were like 12 and other days were like 6, right? So, um, yeah. Struggling with fundamental questions on the exams. Any suggestions? Um, you really, you, it's tough because you're like doing some troubleshooting when you're doing these practice questions, right? You're trying to figure out where your weaknesses are. And so sometimes it helps to have a really good knowledge base. That's why I was saying like studying during that first work to have a good foundation. Because if that foundation is weak, then it's going to be much more difficult. But if you really need to hammer the fundamentals, I think Boards and Beyond was excellent for that. At least I found is very, very helpful, and so is so that might be able to help with kind of the fundamentals. Let's see any other questions here. Um, can I write down all the resources? We'll do a blog post with all of the resources listed there. Okay, and I have the names of the so the Picmonic premium subscription for a year, and then there's another for the turn choice of the Picmonic year-long subscription, Ashton, and then the winner of the True Learn Smart Bank is Kim Walker. So congrats, Kim Walker. I hope this all was helpful. The recap on the blog we'll have all of the resources listed there. And yeah, somebody else is wondering here how long do you learn per day and how long do you stay at your desk? Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to sit, but it's just sitting. I mean, you have to sit to study, or you can choose to stand and study. Um, there are other ways to study as well. So I sit for 8-10 hours a day. It's a lot of sitting. Um, Other ways to study are like obviously standing if you can. You can go to the gym on a treadmill. Um, you can do your flashcards at the gym. I did that from time to time. And then at the gym, you know, on the treadmill, I'd also sometimes put on some videos, like a Pathoma video or something, or a Sketchy video. Especially when I was like traveling or something, I would do flashcards or kind of do things that, you know, I didn't need internet access to get done. So those are some tips to kind of fight all the sitting. And then here in the chat we have a 30% off link for the next 24 hours if you're so inclined to subscribe to Picmonic. So I think that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope this was helpful.